Hello, hello, and thank you for joining us on the next edition of our From the Field episodes of FP Next, bringing you updates straight from the farm field. I'm your co-host Sarah McNaughton-Peterson, and I'm here with Curt Arns.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we're excited to share the latest insights from fields across the country with all of you. And this time we're heading back to North Dakota and sunflower country with today's guests, but we certainly won't be staying there.
Absolutely. I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who doesn't love to see those bright yellow sunflower fields when we're driving across North Dakota, South Dakota, kind of all over the West. And another thing, we're 4 episodes into this series, and I'd love to see some of our sunflower producers or sunflower enthusiasts in the comments on YouTube sharing where they're from.
It would be cool to see that from our listeners. And with that, let's introduce today's guest. John Sandbakken is the Executive Director of National Sunflower Association. He's been in that role since 2012, but before that, he was the National Sunflower Association's International Marketing Director for 16 years. So you're probably a little familiar with John's byline because he shows up in Nebraska Farmer and Dakota Farmer and several other farm progress publications. So John, thank you for joining us today on FP Next.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely. So we already shared a tiny bit about how you have such a long, extensive history with the sunflower industry, but tell us a little bit about your background. Of course, we know you're right here kind of in my neck of the woods over in Mandan, North Dakota, but share our listeners a little bit about yourself.
I grew up in a small town in eastern North Dakota, and I always have been involved in agriculture in some way. Probably half my family were farmers, and always raising crops and cattle, things like that. But before I worked for the association, I worked for the North Dakota Department of Agriculture and Marketing for about 11 years. And so I've been around this industry for, it's almost 30 years now. So long time, and seen a lot of different changes over the years. And it's been an exciting position to be in.
So John, we see your byline, we see your columns all the time in Nebraska Farmer, Dakota Farmer, and our other publications. And that kind of gives us an overview of what the industry's doing. But what does the crop look like right now? I mean, what's your outlook going into the rest of the growing season for sunflowers nationally?
Well, the crop looks really good right now. If you go into the Dakotas, we're probably about that 65, even up to 85% good to excellent category, according to USDA. Excellent ratings there. And really one of the surprises we've had this year is, the last few years we fought drought in the high plains states, especially in Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and into Texas, Oklahoma. And the crop looks just great there also. I mean, it's just something that we've had a rare occurrence. So we've had great crop throughout the central U.S. In fact, when you look at the ratings, we're only at about 3% poor or very poor. So I mean, that is just for this time of year, that's very good for the crop overall.
Absolutely. And, of course, we were chatting a little bit before we started recording that there's been a lot of great moisture happening this year, at least in the Dakotas. But what can you share a little bit about what planting conditions looked like? Or did we have any late frost events anywhere? Soil moisture? I know we've talked a little bit about some hail and some of those other extreme events. What's kind of the growing season looked like this far?
Well, this year the growing season has been challenging, to be honest. I mean, it's been sort of a roller coaster. We've gone from really high temperatures down to freezing in some cases. We've had situations where we didn't have a lot of moisture. Now we're at a point where we maybe are getting almost a little too much moisture in some areas. And so there would be some disease concerns and things like that we're going to be looking out for. But it's just been a really roller coaster of a year. For example, the high plains started out very dry, and then just a lot of rains came through the area, and the crop looks phenomenal. And it's something that, it just recovered well. And I guess it's one of the things, nature sort of balances itself, with all these different periods. But overall, I would say, we're in a really good position right now. We would love to see a lot more heat right now because we're getting close to that bloom period. And that would be really critical, for us in our development.
So as you write your Sunflower Extra column, can you tell us a little bit about how long maybe you've been doing that? And, what if you get any feedback from our readers, and then also, a little bit about your process and how you come up with some of the topics that you write about.
I've been writing that column now for surprisingly 15 years. It's amazing how quickly time goes by. And what I try to do in every single month is I try to give as much pertinent information to growers as possible, so they know what's going on in the sunflower industry, and especially here in the U.S. But I also try to include what's going on globally, because everything that happens in the world for sunflower, it affects each, each one is affected by the other, whether it be production issues in Russia and Ukraine, or if it's growing conditions here in the US and Canada. I mean, it all affects our market. And so every month I just try to bring the most pertinent, most up-to-date data that's possible out there, and just try to give, my readers the insight that they need as far as growing the crop. What kind of opportunities do they see? When should they be marketing the crop, or what kind of the trends are going on in the industry?
Absolutely. I know we just published in Dakota Farmer, of course, your latest sunflower extra column, and you talked a lot about how there's been a big increase in planted acres, and that North Dakota, closely followed by South Dakota, had kind of the biggest increase. Tell me a little bit about maybe why some more growers in those areas are planting more sunflowers than in years past.
Well, with our scenario in 2024, we had some of the lowest acreage numbers in the US in our history. And what led up to that was it all kind of started back in 2022 after the Russians invaded Ukraine. There was this big push to get sunflower acreage planted in the US, and to try to make up for the lost oil opportunities that were going to come out of Ukraine. And so we had just a great crop in 2022. That kind of flowed into 2023. Also, acres were higher than probably what we needed. And what happened was we ended up producing just a little bit too much seed, and it took the market a while to work through it. So last year, our acres are down to 24. But with that, I mean, our stocks are going to be at the lowest point they've been in probably 10 to 12 years. When harvest rolls around this year, I mean, we're going to really be in a real tight situation. And with that, our prices were very attractive this spring and over the winter. The industry was buying acres. They've got to get those acres replaced. So they need the seed, and that's why we were very attractive versus some other crops. And I think that's why we saw that increase in acres.
John, when I was farming full time, we raised sunflowers, black oil sunflowers on our place. We had our own very little wild bird seed company for a while, and I'm in northeast Nebraska, so it's not like a normal sunflower region, even in Nebraska. But one of the best things about it was in August, I would be windrowing along the highway, and people would, when the flowers were in bloom, people would stop and take pictures out in the field and that kind of thing. But we still, even though I wasn't in sunflower country, we still had blackbird issues, and they were still around and found us. And I know that's kind of a concern for sunflower farmers. But what are, going into this growing season, what are some of the, bigger problems that you see, towards the end of the season as far as, weeds, insect, and disease, I guess? What are the big ones on the farmers' minds?
Well, right now, with all this additional moisture that we're getting a little bit concerned about disease. Not quite yet. We've had warmer days, which helps burn off that moisture from being on the leaves, and it keeps the ground a little bit drier. But things that growers should be looking out for right now is rust. The bloom period is one of the most susceptible periods for sunflower as far as getting disease, because it can be, when the blossoms are on, I mean, they can be infected by spores and different things. So rust is something that is easily controllable. And so something that you'd spray some kind of a fungicide, and that can be taken care of easily. Two other diseases that we are always concerned about is phomosas stem canker, and that it's a disease that it gets into the stem of the plant and can cause early maturity, and sometimes that can impact your yield. And so for producers that still have not reached that bloom stage, wouldn't be a bad idea to put some fungicide on right now to increase the health of the plant. And then sclerotinia is also something that we always are concerned about, white mold. That's a big issue. If it comes on early and it just affects the plant early, it's not as much of an issue. But once the seeds form and all that, and if we get that in the head of the sunflower, it can be pretty devastating. So unfortunately, right now we don't have a remedy for that. But the thing is, what you'd want to look for, and most producers do this, they look for varieties that are more sclerotinia resistant, is what they're looking for. For insects, also during the bloom period, it's just like the biggest feeding fest in the country. We have to be looking out for moths. We look out for red sunflower seed weevil, and there are various products out for that. And so especially when you first, I would say like that R4 stage where you've got, the bud is up and it just about to start opening, you want to start scouting. You want to make sure that you don't see any kind of infestation coming into your area. And I know both NDSU, South Dakota State, and others, K-State, they have different kinds of economic models that you can look at to see when you should spray and the times you should spray, because you don't want to affect the good pollinators that are out there. You just want to take care of the bad bugs. But It's something that you want to keep an eye on because that's really important. That's where you can lose your bottom line. You can lose a lot of dollars when you raise the crop if you don't have good insect control, and something that you just want to keep a close eye on now.
I know a few years ago I had attended a online sunflower webinar, and they were talking about the kind of almost insane sounding measures they do to keep blackbirds out of fields. They were talking about cannons and lasers and kind of all of this cool technology, but we talked about the little pests, right? So let's talk about the blackbird pest, because that might be something that a lot of sunflower growers deal with. I know up here in the Dakotas, you always see like the swarms of blackbirds coming down over the sunflower fields. What are some of the technologies you've seen come up in the industry since you've been in the sunflower industry so long? What's kind of the new latest and greatest thing that's helping keep those birds away?
Well, you mentioned the cannons, the pyrotechnic cannons that we have available through USDA Wildlife Services. Those work good for a while, but we were also recommending to producers is to get rid of roosting spots. Right now, in a lot of areas, it's pretty dry. So if you see a cattail slough that's dry, it's a good time to go out there and roll the cattails down, because that's if the birds don't have a place to roost, they won't be near your field. As far as scaring tactics, one of the things that producers are starting to use are drones. Whether they be commercial drones, the larger drones, or just individual smaller drones. They're going out there and chasing the birds out of their fields using that, and trying to get them to move on for another food source. But one of the best ways to deal with birds, and what we usually recommend, is to plant as early as possible. And when the crop is at that point of where you can desiccate it, spend the dollars and desiccate the crop and get it off as early as you can. In a lot of years, if you can desiccate in September, you'll be harvesting early October before the big flights from Canada even come through the country. And so you can just kind of get ahead of the birds. And the thing is, it's always good to harvest as soon as you possibly can, because you want to get ahead of Mother Nature also. You don't want her wind damage to take away some of your crop also.
So, John, we want to plug again your Sunflower Extra column in our magazine. If you had that crystal ball looking, into the next few months and over the next year, what would you say would be the market? The market outlook on the sunflower side.
After our downturn that we had in 24, I think we're on the right track. Acres are up. It looks like a huge percentage, but really, in essence, it's not. It's right around that average amount. I think that the market's going to be very stable, but I think that we have a lot of opportunities this year, because once we get demand back into place, because we'll have a better supply situation, I think it looks very positive for sunflower. Our new crop prices have stayed very firm, over the last few months here. Old crop is also considered at above level, above a historical level right now, obviously because of the tight stocks. And there's going to be some premiums, I think, in place that if you can desiccate and you can deliver in September, even if it's the end of September, I think that producers are going to see a little bit of a bump in price by delivering in September if they can.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing. We're going to wrap up our From the Field episode there. And of course, we will be adding those links in. So if you want to go look at the latest Sunflower Extra columns, check out the episode description. And of course, this is our latest offering from FP Next, of course, powered by John Deere.
Yeah, we want to thank our listeners for listening and watching this latest episode, and we're excited to bring you farmers from across the nation during this growing season.
Absolutely. And don't forget, this is a video podcast episode. So if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music, jump on over to our Farm Progress YouTube channel. You can see our bright, shiny faces. And be sure to come back next week for our Field View episode. We're visiting with Farm Progress's own Matt Youngman and This Week in Agribusiness host Mike Pearson, and we're talking all things farm shows.
Yep, it's getting that time, Sarah, so we're excited to hear about the new things coming to our favorite farm shows, including the Drone Zone and the Manure Spreader application demos, just to name a few.
Absolutely, and as always, we're wishing everybody a safe and prosperous growing season, and remember, if it's agriculture, your friends at Farm Progress have you covered. Here's wishing you high yields and good weather. We'll see you next time.